I'm Ethan, a 32-year-old software engineer from San Francisco. Last year, everything I thought I knew about family changed forever. It began with a single number on a screen, $6 million. dollars. That's how much I earned when my small tech startup was acquired. $6 million, dollars, more than I ever dreamed of. Enough to secure my future, travel the world, live comfortably without ever worrying again. But it was also the moment my father saw me not as his son, but as an opportunity. My father, Richard, was always a man of ambition, but rarely of success. He spent his life chasing the next big deal, a real estate investment here, a business partnership there, but his dreams never became reality. A failed restaurant, a botched property deal, investments that crumbled. By the time I sold my startup, he was a mid-level manager at a struggling construction firm. He wore his failures like invisible scars, hiding them beneath a mask of bravado. But beneath that mask, there was always hunger, a hunger for success, for wealth, for recognition. I had always known he was hard to please. Growing up, my childhood was a series of tests. If I brought home an A, he'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I scored a goal in soccer, he'd ask why I didn't score two. His praise was always just out of reach, like a mirage. But I tried, God, I tried, because despite everything, I loved him. I wanted him to be proud of me. But when the money came, so did the darkness. At first it was subtle. Dad's praise felt forced, his smiles too wide, his laughter too loud. At family gatherings, he'd introduce me to relatives like I was a trophy. This is my son, Ethan. Sold his company for millions, a real genius. The way he spoke felt less like pride and more like a sales pitch. But I ignored it. I told myself he was just proud, even if it felt wrong. Then came the borrowing. Ethan, can you help me out, son? Just 1,000, a small loan until payday. I didn't think twice. He was my father. But 1,000 became 5,000. 5 became 10. The company's struggling, he'd say. Just a rough patch. I gave and gave, hoping that each loan would be the last, that maybe if I helped enough, he'd finally look at me and see a son, not a walking wallet. But it didn't stop. The calls became more frequent, the excuses more desperate. My mother, Martha, called me one night, her voice a whisper. Ethan, please, don't give him any more money. He's not himself. But how could I say no? He was my father, even when his voice became cold and demanding. Even when the man who once lectured me about hard work now only spoke to me when he needed cash. Then came that Sunday night. Family dinner, my parents' house. The same cozy two-story home I grew up in. The scent of roast beef filled the air, the table set with my mother's best china, candles casting a warm glow. Dad seemed different, jovial, almost too cheerful, his smile stretched wide, his laughter booming. A toast, he declared, standing with a glass of deep red wine. To family, and to my brilliant son. A true success. He handed me a glass, his eyes locking onto mine. I reached out, but as my fingers touched the glass, a chill ran down my spine. His smile lingered, a little too long. His gaze, there was something in it. Not pride, not love, but something else. I tried to shake off the feeling. I was being paranoid. This was my father. But then I noticed the slight tremor in his hand, the way he watched me, unblinking. My heart began to race. Instinct kicked in. I smiled back, lifted the glass, but as everyone's attention turned to Dad's toast, I shifted, pretending to adjust the candle on the table. In that heartbeat, I switched our glasses. It was fast, smooth. He didn't notice. No one did. I raised the glass, he raised his. We drank. For a moment, nothing happened. I almost laughed at myself for being so paranoid. But then 10 minutes passed. 15. I was just beginning to feel the tension leave my shoulders when I heard it. The sharp, ragged gasp. Dad's face had gone pale. His hand trembled, his breathing turned shallow. Richard? My mother's voice was sharp with fear. He staggered, clutching his chest. His glass slipped from his grip, shattering on the floor, a dark stain of wine spreading across the white carpet. He tried to speak, but the words came out as a desperate wheeze. His eyes locked onto mine, wide with terror, as if realizing something. Then he collapsed. I stood frozen, a cold, numb feeling spreading through me. Around me, chaos erupted. My mother screamed, her hands shaking as she reached for him. Relatives shouted, someone called an ambulance. But I stood still, staring at the shattered glass, at the dark red stain. I knew. I knew in that moment. He hadn't toasted me. He hadn't smiled with pride. He had tried to poison me, and I had switched our glasses. My mother's screams seemed distant, muffled, like I was hearing them from underwater. Relatives crowded around, trying to lift my father, his face ashen, his breaths coming in desperate, shallow gasps. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I stood rooted to the spot, my gaze fixed on the dark red stain of spilled wine, the broken shards of glass glittering like tiny knives. My father was dying, because of me. Not because of me, because of him. I forced myself to breathe, to blink, to look away from the spreading stain. My mother was kneeling beside him, her trembling hands trying to cradle his head. "Richard, Richard, stay with me!" Her voice broke, tears streaming down her face. I stepped back, my legs weak, the room tilting slightly. Air felt thick, suffocating. "Ethan! Ethan! Help him!" My mother's voice cut through the fog, desperate, pleading. I forced myself to move, kneeling beside them. My father's eyes fluttered, his lips moving, but no sound came out. His hand grasped at nothing, clawing the air, his gaze wild and terrified. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear, pure, desperate fear. And I was the reason. The paramedics arrived in a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. They lifted my father onto a stretcher, one of them asking rapid-fire questions. "What happened? How long has he been like this?" My mother's voice was a frantic sob. He just collapsed. We were having dinner. He was fine. He was fine." I wanted to speak, to explain, but what could I say? He tried to poison me. I switched our glasses. I didn't even know for sure. I didn't know anything except the darkness clawing at my chest. I rode with my mother to the hospital, the car silent except for her quiet, broken sobs. She kept looking at me, her tear-filled eyes desperate. "Ethan, what's happening? He was fine. He was fine." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring, my mind a chaotic storm. Had I just killed my father? Was it even poison? Or was I just paranoid? Was I going insane? The hours in the waiting room stretched like an eternity. My mother paced, her hands wringing, her whispered prayers blending with the sterile hum of the overhead lights. I sat, frozen, my fingers gripping the armrests of the plastic chair until my knuckles turned white. Nurses came and went. Doctors walked by without looking at us. My mother's sobs had quieted, turning into silent, trembling breaths. And then finally a doctor approached us. His face was a practiced mask of calm. "Mrs. Carter?" My mother jumped to her feet. I forced myself to stand. "Your husband is stable for now. We're running some tests, but his symptoms suggest a severe toxic reaction." "Toxic?" My mother's voice cracked. "What do you mean? Like food poisoning?" The doctor hesitated. "We can't say for sure yet, but we're checking for any substances in his system that could have caused this." His gaze shifted to me, a subtle, questioning glance. I felt a cold sweat prickling my skin. He knew, or at least he suspected. Can we see him?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Not yet. He's under observation. We'll let you know as soon as we have more information." The doctor left, and my mother sank into the chair, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Oh, God, Richard, please." I couldn't sit. I paced, my mind racing. Poison. It had to be poison. But how? Why? I knew why. The desperate calls for money, the constant borrowing, the resentment simmering beneath his praise, and the way he looked at me tonight. That smile, the way he watched me drink. He never meant for me to leave that house alive, but he didn't know I knew. He didn't know I saw through the mask. And now he was the one lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. Hours blurred together. My mother drifted between crying and praying, her words a whispered, desperate litany. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my thoughts clear. I needed to know. I needed proof. I couldn't just accuse him, not without being sure. But how could I be sure? Then I remembered the broken glass on the floor of the dining room, the dark red stain on the carpet, the wine. I needed that wine. If there was anything in it, anything that could prove what I already feared. Mom, I need to go home for a bit. I'll grab some of your things. A change of clothes, some toiletries. My voice was almost steady. She looked at me, her eyes lost. Will you be okay? She nodded weakly, clutching her purse. Thank you, Ethan. You're such a good boy. A good boy. I left the hospital, the cold night air biting at my face. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, but my mind was sharp now, focused. I knew what I needed to do. I drove straight back to my parents' house. The street was quiet, the house dark, a silent shell hiding the truth. I stepped inside, the faint scent of roast beef still lingering, the candles long burned out. And there it was, the shattered glass, the dark stain on the carpet, dried now, a blackish red mark. I grabbed a small plastic bag from the kitchen, kneeling down, carefully picking up the largest shards of glass. There were still a few drops of wine clinging to the edges, a faint dark smear. Carefully I collected them, sealed the bag. My heart pounded like a drum. I needed a lab, somewhere that wouldn't ask too many questions. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. Ethan, they said he's awake, but he's not speaking. They're running more tests. My fingers trembled. He was awake. Awake and probably wondering why he wasn't dead. Wondering if I knew. And I did know. I knew everything. But now I needed proof. And if I was right, if I wasn't just being paranoid, then I had just stopped my own father from murdering me. But why? Why would he do this? Was it just the money? Was I nothing more to him than an obstacle? A son who succeeded where he failed? My mind raced, a storm of anger, betrayal, and a growing, icy resolve. I drove straight to a private lab, a place I'd heard of through friends in the tech world. Discreet, no questions asked. A tired-looking technician took the bag, her gaze lingering on me for a moment. Testing for toxins? Yes, I forced myself to answer, my voice cold. As fast as possible. 3 days, she said. We'll call you. 3 days. 72 hours of not knowing if I was paranoid or if my own father had just tried to kill me. But deep down, I already knew. The 3 days crawled by like a slow-moving storm. Every minute was a battle with my own mind, filled with restless thoughts and a gnawing sense of dread. I barely slept. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped, only to sink again when it wasn't the lab. My mother called often, her voice frail but determined. Ethan, Richard is stable, but they're keeping him under observation. Please be careful. I wanted to tell her everything, to confide in her my suspicions. But how could I? Not yet. Not without proof. Finally, the call came. The technician's voice was clinical but grave. Mr. Carter, the sample you provided tested positive for barbiturate compounds, a sedative at a concentration high enough to cause unconsciousness. Possibly worse. This was definitely not wine. I felt the room tilt. Barbiturates. Poison. My father's drink had been laced, meant to knock me out, or worse. I drove straight to the hospital, my hands trembling around the steering wheel, the weight of that truth crushing me. When I arrived, my mother met me in the waiting room, tears shining in her eyes. Ethan, the doctors say your father's condition is serious, but he's alive. He's alive. We sat in silence, the hospital's sterile air pressing down on us. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let this slide. This was no longer about family or forgiveness. This was about justice, survival, and finally breaking free. That evening I confronted him. Alone in the dimly lit living room of the house I grew up in, my father sat in his favorite armchair, a glass of wine in hand. His eyes flickered with a cold, calculating light. Ethan, he said, voice calm but edged with something I'd never heard before. You're quite the son, smarter than I gave you credit for. I dropped the lab report on the table. I know what you did. The poison in my glass. You tried to kill me. He laughed, bitter and hollow. You don't understand. I was drowning in debt. I needed your money. I planned to forge a will once you were out of the way. It was business, not personal. I looked at the broken man who'd once been my father. His confession cut deep, but strangely, the fury I expected didn't rise. Instead, a cold, numb sadness settled in. Why, Dad? I asked quietly. Why did it come to this? He didn't answer, only bowed his head, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. I'm not calling the police, I said, my voice steady, but stay away from me and from Mom. This ends now. As I left the room, I saw my mother standing in the doorway, her eyes red but fierce. She nodded once, silently, and I knew everything had changed. The man I called Dad was gone. The empire he tried to build by destroying me crumbled in the silence of that night, and I was free. If you like stories like this, please subscribe for more. Your support means everything.